I want to review some high-level participation and performance items as they relate to a specific table, and then state and local performance. I want to review again that PowerPoint that we viewed, sort of a whirlwind gloss during Summer Summit, as that information was a week old in July. We got to talk about this new particularity and how we're going to track career services, and then some discussions related to PD. And then finally, topics that you've broached in all, in full disclosure, I haven't reviewed any of the quarterly reports yet, and a couple I believe are still outstanding, but there was anecdotally some perceived increase in 16 and 17-year-olds, and any other topics you'd like to discuss. I see LATI has since joined us, so we'll go ahead. Good morning. Good morning. So we shall go ahead and commence if there aren't any questions or items of order. No? Okay. So I'm going to slowly take you to the tab page. And you have this link. It's really for your reference, a lot of the marketing talking points. But what I thought, just as a reminder, this is purportedly the new tape series, 11 and 12, is 100% aligned to college and career readiness standards. That second bullet, I don't know if I realized that. There's no longer going to be a survey and battery, or no longer those two options, only one length. With the new test, approximately 40 questions per section. And then another change, they've combined math, no longer the math computational and applied, but just one test. The locator for the table 11 and 12 is lengthened slightly. I don't know what that means. Maybe some of you have heard. I understand the locator currently consists of 12 questions. And so any notion?
The only thing I had heard is the only thing that I had heard is that there were, because the predictability was non-existent with the old one, that they were trying to increase the amount of questions that could possibly happen based on responses, just to make sure that they're truly in the right level. So I think what I heard, it's going to be more questions. But I didn't.
Go ahead.
I didn't hear whether those questions were going to, if there was computer adaptation based on the previous questions, if they keep asking questions until they got to the right level, or if it stopped. I wasn't sure about that. I think.
No, it's.
Oh, go ahead.
It's not computer adaptive. There was some discussion about that in the COAB session for Table 11-12 last spring that I attended, but they said they're not at that point yet. So it's not computer adaptive, but they did talk about the lengthening being for better predictability. And at one point, I might have known how many questions, but I don't have my notes in front of me now, and I can't remember.
Becky? Was that Becky?
Yes. Sorry, yes.
Thank you. No, and that reconciles with what I heard. The adaptive functionality has not yet been federally approved, and maybe in the future, but for now, adding more questions purportedly will reduce the error of measurement. We're getting more data to make, and if we can really reduce guesses on that, we should have a little bit better placement. The next item, I thought it was worth noting that although I don't know if many of you use the spelling, vocabulary, and mechanics subtests, they will no longer be available. And we could have a discussion offline. If you still have some use for those, we have paper, pencil, and all those booklets yet. I have quite a few extras. So if you ever had any formative reason to use those, as a supplement, I'll get some feedback there. But otherwise, we won't be using those in the new series. And we have yet to see how much alignment data will have. Of course, they're catering to their own assessment task, and I have no updates whatsoever in terms of if and when South Dakota plans to move that forward. Well, I'm getting some feedback there. Thank you. So, and the last I knew, there weren't really any providers who were at a place they were seriously considering the task, given so many unknowns. I don't know if anyone has comments or questions or amendments to that suggestion. Okay. Quickly, the literacy, it seems a lot, or it seems somewhat reminiscent of NCRC work keys with informational text, but also some literary text and foundational skills there. So you have that link. I really don't have any more information than most of you. And then secondly, here's this full suite of accessibility and accommodation tools. And I think most of these existed under TABE 9 and 10 online with that previous platform, the online administration system, the OAS, I believe. But maybe there's some difference. I don't know that I could define masking. I don't know if that blocks text so you can look at just a specific passage without being distracted. Anyone have some insight here? And this is more, I wanted to make you aware as we move forward and think about TABE 11 and 12, where we are in terms of training needs.
John, this is Kim, and that's when it just lets you read one line at a time.
Okay,
the math.
Thank you. All right, thank you. And as I look at these, any one of these tools could be available without any documentation, right? These aren't going to require an IEP or 504 plan or any sort of documentation. These should be available to all of our students. And then finally, this is just I don't want to say just, but in disclosure, this is some educators' blog, assessment representatives' blog, but I just wanted to show you. I had heard anecdotally January. Here it reads 11 and 12 being available as soon as January 8th. So fewer than 2 months away. So given that, we have considerations of having to use the same post-test as we did the pre-test. Does a plan to phase this in, if, let's just say hypothetically, if the timeline is on track and these assessments really are available, it could be postponed. We've seen that with new technology months in advance. But if we were to maintain this timeline, is it realistic for us to phase into the TABE 11-12 at least partially, if not extensively, by July 1?
Since Cornerstones hasn't even went online with the new platform yet, probably not.
By July.
That depends on what platform it comes out, and we'll be scrambling. to figure that out.
And I think you're referencing whether or not it's available paper pencil and or online only.
No, 32-bit, if there's a 32-bit version available for download.
Oh, so more of the requirements, the technical requirements for your systems to be able to operate it.
Right.
Okay. I'm going to take a couple notes here while you're, go ahead.
I'm sorry, this is Gloria and Stephanie. We do have the new platform, and we've been working through some of the challenges with that, as you're aware of. I wonder if we could not have a few locations that have the new platform pilot 11 and 12 in July. Is that a possibility to do a few at a time or not?
That's a worthy point to consider. I'm making a couple of notes. It bears mentioning that right now there are only 437 remaining TABE online administrations, and I think that CLC of the Black Hills and maybe the Right Turn are currently using the Insight platform, but outside of that, do I trust that everyone else is paper pencil yet? And what I'm getting at is noting that at some point, depending on how long we protract the transition, we might need to look at purchasing additional TABE 9 and 10 administrations in the meantime.
Hey, John, this is Mary. Do you have, or can you get a list of what the technical requirements are, like the 32-bit versus 64-bit, whatever? A list or some citation that says what our computer technology needs to be able to support this. We're running the new platform, so I'd like to think that we'd be okay to use the 1112, but if there's anything different in what the hardware or software specifications are, I think we need to know that before we can give you a launch date.
Yeah, well, and I think that's an excellent suggestion and not one outside of the realm of possibility. Now, whether or not Mike Johnson has an answer, he's the highest level representative I know, but I shall email him and inquire about the technical requirements, as well as whether they have any, if he's able to share with me paper pencil, computer based, both at the same time, or one first with the second one coming later this spring type of thing.
Right, and then if you decide you do want to go with the idea of doing a pilot site, Right Turn would be happy to be a pilot site.
Good, I appreciate that, and I think we could learn a lot just in terms of the navigation issues and opportunities that you might see, with your student population, and it wouldn't necessarily be like transitioning hundreds of students at, in a quarter, in a program year quarter. Okay. Any other potential questions or suggestions I might share with McGraw-Hill, DRC, and Mike Johnson? To Gloria's point, CLC of the Black Hills has sent multiple questions. I would say some more sophisticated user end questions about viewing and sorting and reported details, this and that, and those were well received. As to the timeline of those functionalities being available, it's hard to say, but other questions or comments on TABE 11 and 12? And maybe for some of you, without knowing the paper pencil scoring system, will it be, carbon copy? Will it be stencil overlays? Will it be hand scoring? or will it be all online? Maybe we can't really move this forward until we have those details.
John, are they going to have paper pencil? I was under the impression they weren't. That was at least a year further down the road.
I really don't know. It's all speculation at that point. I did hear from the feds, from Octay, that they imagined that TABE 9 and 10 would not sunset before June 30th, 2019 at the minimum. So
yeah, we were going to get one more year of transition. I did know that.
Yeah.
But I don't know that they're going to have a paper pencil version of 11-12. Or at least it was a year later. So.
Well, we'll need to inquire. Well, I've been putting away some of the state admin funds and some of the state leadership funds, planning for this eventual release, and so I don't know that it's how cost per, or how. I don't know what the sticker price is going to be. How shocking! But it's my hope that the funding won't be as challenging as just the implementation and the training and the troubleshooting and really recalibrating a number of small issues, but maybe in totality a lot of those changes make it pretty different.
John, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Please. Gloria, I have a question. Is it my understanding 11 and 12 will be released in January?
Right. And I don't know whether this is accurate, but here, according to this individual, she is suggesting January 8th.
Okay. Well, one of my thoughts, and I need to be careful that I make certain my team agrees, but rather than you buying additional 9 and 10 online, if we could change to 11, 12 when it's released, maybe that would make more sense, and we could be the guinea pig and see, what some of the challenges are. So I just plant that as a consideration, if that would make more sense than buying additional 9.
Well, yeah, I like that. I appreciate that, and that's another question. Thank you to my list here, which has sort of been ongoing. I'd carbon copied Mike Johnson on this, but he never responded as to whether we could buy individual subtests rather than batteries, so that if we want to just post-test on 1 or 2 of the subtests rather than all 3, it would be the most cost-effective. But what I do anticipate will happen is that ultimately these are pass-through funds. The reason we have this current system now is because in 2011, DLR had incentive monies they needed to spend down and obligate before they were expired. And so we had $50,000 and we purchased in bulk TABE Online 910 and Best Plus administrations. And so we've been writing on that $50,000 worth of assessments for the past 6 years, almost exactly. So my
John,
point is, yeah.
Go ahead and finish, please.
Oh, I was just going to say at this point, it was all top-down, sort of centralized, because it was a centralized purchase. In the future, I was thinking so that you have control and don't need to rely on me when administration totals are depleted or this and that you will have authority over your own local assessment processes. Go ahead.
This is Becky. I had found my notes from the TABE COABE session, and there's a couple of other considerations with 11 and 12 other than just the online platform. There's an examinee tutorial that the students need to take prior to testing that takes at least half an hour. So I had made a note that we would want to think about if that happened during the first testing session, or if they want, if we wanted to have students complete that tutorial prior to their first quote unquote real TABE appointment.
Half an hour, huh?
Yes. And then I actually did find the locator test 16 questions for math and language, 19 questions for reading. So not measurably longer, but several questions for each test.
Okay. Good.
The reading test is 47 questions, but students have 120 minutes to complete that test. Because there are more standards for reading, they wanted to make sure that, and because the test requires more rigorous reading, students are given a longer time because they wanted to ensure that students would not have to worry about running out of time. They said no one has taken all the time allotted for the reading test during the field testing, but I still think it's a consideration for us when we're considering scheduling our testing blocks. That's 2 hours for one test.
Wow. Yeah.
You know, the math test is 40 questions and students have 75 minutes. The language test is 40 questions and students have 80 minutes. So you're looking at whatever time the locator takes, plus then, you know, almost 5 hours of testing time if they do take that entire 120 minutes, which they're given. So I think those are significant points to consider as we think about transitioning. It's not just the physical test, it's also considerations on our testing time and our scheduling and how we handle that initial tutorial before the test. So there are some other considerations to think about as we make those decisions as well.
Wow. Okay, yeah. Thank you for those items.
Question for you. Do you know if that tutorial is a one-time event or is that required before each test session?
My impression, Mary, was it was a one-time event.
Okay.
Potentially something that might be done during orientation or in a group setting, perhaps, if possible.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, John. This is Gloria. That does it have to be presented right before the test?
I don't believe so. I don't believe so. Because I had made a note too, you know, could this happen during orientation? Is this how we would want to schedule this?
Well, yeah, and even though just 4 more questions and that, whatever you said, maybe it was math or reading, still that's 33% more questions than the previous. So, and when we consider now the ability to post-test on multiple subjects, if we have a valid pretest on those subjects, and in some of these potential changes, we will have some significant considerations in the future. All right, well, good. I think I have this structure here for a meaningful email to DRC, ask about technical requirements, to inquire about paper pencil versus online availability, scoring, and then if those could potentially be purchased via subtest and that. Okay. Any other comments or questions related to TABE assessments? Are most of you then just planning to maintain paper and pencil until necessity compels you otherwise, as it relates to the DRC Insight portal? Is it more when you have the time, maybe over the winter holiday?
We're going to try and
cornerstones.
We're going to try and get something in. The soonest it'll be is January.
Yeah.
If and the biggest if is if it can do a 32-bit system. If it can't, it will have to be sometime in the distant future because we don't have the resources to roll that out with new computers right now.
All right, very good.
We're already using it in Watertown, so we're okay.
Oh, you are?
Yep.
No major issues?
Nope. It's been good.
Okay. And so LATI Watertown, CLC the Black Hills, and the Right Turn have all transitioned?
And Brookings, our Brookings site as well.
Oh, and Brookings. Okay, very good. All right. Then the the next topic, student hard copy file. And there were at least 2 agencies who have maintained a certain form. They referenced it, I think both of them, by a color, the color on which it was printed. But Jennifer Keys, if I might put you on the spot, and I feel remiss, after we, in 2012, when we went from goals to cohorts, we didn't have goal setting as a formal function, but it was my expectation that you would still have something in the hard copy file related to instructional goal setting. But I was deferring to local control, and I was probably rather implicit about it and not direct. And so with visits this summer, there was a sheet that some were still using, thinking it was a requirement, and it was really just a time sink of handwritten data input. So Jennifer, can you share that particular item?
Sure. It was a goal sheet that was required when Marcia Hess was still here. The front, the students could really fill out by themselves. In the back, it had long-term goal and then steps to get to that goal. And sometimes it was just too far out for the students to think about. So I just asked John if that was still required, and that specific sheet is not required, but some type of goal sheet is still required for the student file.
So my question to you, do you find what you're using sufficient in terms of setting instructional goals? Or in other words, on the standardized student intake form, there still is that vestige of WIA that we've kept related to, related to instructional goals. And this is not the most current. Maybe it is. Well, maybe this one doesn't have, working with children, are you collecting these, like here, learner goals for attending? Sorry, scrolling, there you go. Are you in some place sufficient for your needs and the student's needs, identifying, articulating, and documenting learner goals, informal learner goals?
John?
Yes.
This is Steph Ritberger, and what we do is we have our own form that we do through enrollment, and the students kind of go through and set their goals, and then we go back and talk about the learner goals for attending and then mark them.
Yeah, perfect. Right. And I think it probably, when you're dealing with 5 different satellites, whether it's Cornerstones or CLC of the Black Hills or DOC, how you do this might vary from site to site. But I just wanted to let everyone know that outside of the student intake form, student signature on the release of information, I don't even necessarily expect hours, student contact hours, to be in every one of the hard copy files. If you have it all digitized, and then I see some of you even have it multiple places. You've got it on your internal spreadsheet and within LACES and then some other form. I do not want to burden you with any more redundancy. I know corrections has their own data system that they have to maintain, and so I'm really trying to unencumber the process, but I trust there needs to be some type of instructional goal setting, even if that takes us, back to the narrative descriptions of the educational functioning level, right? Like in our assessment policy. Go ahead.
I'm confused by this a little bit. I guess I would like further explanation of what the minimum expectation is. I mean, when I'm doing an intake with someone who has absolutely zero English skills, setting goals, I'm just hoping to get their address right. And we're dealing with hundreds of those. I mean, I know that learning English is their goal. That's why they're there. And the more, the more they have in English skills, the more I can get. But
well, I mean, in that intake, you're also collecting information regarding their employment status, right? I mean, you have some. Can you at least identify which students are looking for work and which students are?
The majority of our students, by and far and large, are already employed. So when I ask, do you work, they're already, that I can basically get, it's either Turkey, it's MFG, it's LSI,
Right.
And that's about all
and in those,
I get.
Sure. And in those circumstances, to me, given those limited English skills and the multitudes of students you're working with, if they're showing up for English instruction and they're employed, and looking at however you mark those barriers to employment, I think right there you triangulate those, and our goals here are to increase the numeracy, oracy, and literacy skills of these individuals to maintain and advance in their employment. I don't need that necessarily handwritten anywhere, but we need, I think, even some working model for how we're tracking progress in across that class, or with that. Does that seem like a
And maybe we need to sit down and talk about this individually, because maybe it doesn't affect everyone the same as it does a couple programs, maybe.
Sure. Well, and then maybe I need to reframe my question. If there are certain processes, whether it's the hard copy file or data entry into LACES or whatever it is, reporting, that are proving burdensome for particular reasons, please do not hesitate to contact me, and we'll see how to ameliorate that. I just didn't want to perpetuate any long-standing expectations as they relate to the hard copy student file.
John?
Yes.
This is again. I just wanted to ask too, do you want something interior of the file that says when the goals are updated? Because we always update when we post TABE, and then we update. We actually update a couple times in the year, but we always, when they post test, and if they haven't hit their 40 hours, we do it at the end of the fiscal year. And if they've completed a GED or something else in between, we do it there as well.
No, and you mean in terms of documenting something in the database related to their personal instructional goals? No, if you're doing that as part of your case management, I don't want to add any more burden to that. And the case managing that you're doing with a student who is on a potential career pathway versus someone with pre-literate English skills might be very different. But no, you don't need to. I think updating that in the file and having those conversations are more than sufficient.
Say, John, this is Mary. Is there language in our printed AEL policy manual that talks about what hard copy paper documents are required? And if not, if there is, then maybe we could update that. If there's not, maybe we could look at having a section in there that just is very explicit so that we're all on the same page there. I appreciate that you're wanting to streamline and reduce any unnecessary burdens for us.
to your question, the area, there was a part of, there is an old part of the 2009 AEL policy manual that has that, but that has long since been antiquated. So in terms of the assessment policy, that and a revision is needed of the assessment policy to include these new NRS changes. So I appreciate that suggestion. And you know, to Kim, your comment earlier about working with those low-level learners, I'm just imagining a federal monitor and asking, you know, what's the program of study, or you know, what are there any measurable goals? And I think even having some very rudimentary, you know, what's the purpose of this class, or why is this student here? It doesn't necessarily need to be a highly detailed note, but some understanding of the instructional goals for that program, even at that highest level of increased literacy and numeracy skills to maintain job or to find work.
Is if they're in entry-level English language class, I mean, we have a very structured syllabus that every student in that level would do, and what the goals are that they're supposed to accomplish. If they're in that level class, as long as their goals are matching on their intake as to what class they're in, is that addressing it?
I don't even know if you'd have to go that far, but because if they're in that section of class and here are the curricular goals for that class, boy, I think that's in and of, as long as we can, you know, take the feds there and show them, do I need it in LACES in a drop down? No. Do you need to handwrite that in a hard copy file? No.
But as long as we can track the system of who they are, what their goals are, and what class they're in, and what the class accomplishes.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. They're in this class. This class's goals are X, Y, Z. Therefore, exactly. And that's really solid. And it's standards based and curricularly driven. Good. Okay. Well, and thanks, Mary, too, for that suggestion. Within the assessment policy, I also need to add a acronym and initialism / definition glossary for all the WIOA terms. So changes on that to come. All right. Participation and performance. Boy, I don't know how long I want to spend on that. Let me sign in here quickly. I believe it bears reiterating that you providers exceeded your federally negotiated targets. This would be the third of 4 recent years, 3 of the 4 past years. And now I believe you should have, maybe you don't at your local level, but the deduplicated functionality. Let's see if you can see this. I don't know if you can all see that. But here's our new table 4. And again, I want to remind you that we're actually, our federal targets are based on column K as in kilo. And so you'll see our grand total, it rounds to 42% educational gain. And I don't have it. I have it up, but that exceeds our targets as in your assessment policy from 16-17. The adult basic ed total exceeded our target. So ABE, the past number of years, ESL has really made a lot of progress for, I believe, multiple reasons. But this year, our ABE figures improved a little bit more significantly. So kudos on that. And then I want to ask if all of you have had a chance to look at this participant characteristics report. And so these are some of the data that we're reporting jointly across titles 1, 2, 3, and 4. And eventually we'll begin to collect employment data based on quarter 2 and quarter 4 after exit, and then median earnings. So these are data matching efforts that I need to implement this year. That credential attainment rate, that'll become active now that time has elapsed after exit. But I think it's interesting to look at these completion rates for different race ethnicities, for age groups, and then also you can look at by employment barriers and how we're meeting, like our youth in foster care. We had 5 individuals in youth for foster care, but didn't manage to achieve any gains. Single parents, homeless individuals, ex-offenders. So some of those data might prove useful or informative when you're having discussions with certain entities. For a homeless coalition, you could look at your data at the local level and perhaps assert that more than half of the homeless individuals you served last year made measurable skill gains and so forth. Questions or comments related to participation and performance?
Yeah, John, this is Mary. So maybe this is a question for the next LACES webinar, and if so, I'll wait. But maybe it's a quick question you can answer now. I couldn't figure out how to make sure that our participants were populating the low income, where we were entering the data in LACES, entering them in and checking the economic disadvantage as a barrier to employment, but that wasn't then ensuring that those individuals were populated as low income. And I couldn't figure out how to make them populate under low income.
Well, I'll make a note of that for the webinar, but low income almost sounds like a remnant of WIA, and if you're using that at the local level for whatever reasons, it's one thing, but in terms of reporting to the feds barriers to employment, low income, oh, you mean here, low income individuals? We're having, so as a barrier, huh? What did you say you were entering as a barrier?
Economic disadvantage.
Mm-hmm. Economic disadvantage.
Economic disadvantage is an option in LACES.
Yeah, and here it's Becky? I think we might have to revisit.
I know, Mary, I know the box you're talking about. I think that box is on the new student, the first new student screen.
Yes.
I'm looking, I'm actually in LACES right now, and I'm kind of looking around and I don't see it. That's probably a question for our next LACES training, just so we don't take too much time today. But I know the box you mean. And I think it's tied to that. I wanted to say demographics, but I'm not seeing it in demographics. So I think that's maybe a good question for our next LACES training.
Good. But yeah, but these do, as we've discussed before, impact impact the joint report, and maybe that's a good segue to this, right? And here's where we're entering these data across age and ethnicity. I'm trying not to scroll too fast, and all these employment barriers, low-income individuals. So I wonder if that economic disadvantage is a holdover. But since we're here, I don't know if we need a work group or what suggestions you might have. We got a pass or a buy this year, but next year for program year 17-18, the state as a program needs to report on these two rows. Well, and then this third row. So career services, and we got to look at the participants served and exited, and then the funds expended, and then that'll be an automatic calculation, as well as the training services. And I will we'll talk about this more in a moment here. And then furthermore, I've broached this repeatedly with Director Ringstmeyer and Director McIntaffer and Director Solvasi about where we are moving forward in tracking co-enrollments with other core programs and required partners. And I don't have any definitive response yet. It was my hope that we could all data match together, and that didn't happen this year, despite planned efforts. It sort of everyone kind of walked away and just submitted their own data. And I hadn't asked you. I know LATI was still tracking using the funding stream those individuals who they knew were co-enrolled, but I wasn't asking you to track that. So I didn't report anything this year, which was allowable. But anyway, we're going to need to discuss that, and I don't want the burden of having to identify who's in Wagner-Peiser or Title I workforce training to fall on Title II, frankly. So maybe it can be handled with a data match, but that's sort of, what's the term I'm looking for? Summative. It's sort of final. It's sort of, the end of the year, and that's who they were. And that doesn't do us a whole lot of good throughout the year as we're supposedly coordinating, communicating, and collaborating in integrated resource teams. So, but anyway, more on that to come. But in terms of how we're going to track career services and training services. So if you look here at this chart, this comes from a program memoranda. All of the core programs receive this, but this is our chart here. And you'll see most of those are career services, albeit that final IET. So outreach, intake, and orientation, those are career services. And the initial assessment, the pre-test, that's considered a career service, just like referrals. But post-testing, instruction after the initial pretest, those are not considered career services, okay? And then you throw in training services applicable to those who are actually operating IET programs, not necessarily IET activities. And where does that put us? So any idea of how we might begin to track the funds expended on career services that include intake, orientation, pre-tests, and referrals?
Well, and John, can you put that other sheet back up again, please? The one with the definitions of career services and training services. Thank you. So if I'm reading this correctly, and I read it quickly, but this also, like the last two career services boxes here, if we're providing information to these participants about other providers, our Title I partners, our Title IV partners, post-secondary institutions, other resources and services within our own communities, because it talks about referrals for childcare, child support, medical or child health assistance, all of those things. Anytime we're talking about those things with a participant, that's also considered career services. Am I reading that correctly? Because it says provision of information on those supportive services. So that to me says anytime we're talking to students about the availability of those programs, that would be a career service.
And let me take that one further. Do you think that if we're providing performance information of a common part client with our DLR partners, for example, that would be considered a career service?
That's what it looks like to me. That's how I would interpret. Yeah.
And not to muddy the waters, but I heard recently that at that workforce council meeting last week or the week prior, that the new plan in terms of the WIO and one-stop infrastructure costs are to actually charge $1.40 to all the other agencies to which we make a direct referral. So ostensibly that's DLR. Whenever it makes a referral to Job Corps, maybe it makes 12 referrals to Job Corps at that local office during the month of December, then it's, $16 or what have you that Job Corps pays to the One Stop as part of their infrastructure cost, maintenance of effort or something. So I don't know if this will ever, if any of that impacts. Go ahead.
John, one of the things they said is they were talking about how they're going to track that within their data system when they're making those referrals. Like there'll be a checkbox, hey, I made a referral to, and it'll be extrapolated from there. It won't be each individual site reporting it at the local Department of Labor office.
Oh.
So it isn't like they're saying, hey, so-and-so, bill them for this. It'll be something that comes out of data matching through their system.
At the state level, huh?
Yes.
And did they say explicitly as it relates to Title II, because we're partner programs, there would be no cost for referrals?
No, once again, they didn't mention Title II at all.
Title II is, John, this is Gloria, and correct me, Kim and Mary, but I had understood Title II would not be impacted by this at all. And the state does not, the state is really frustrated with this requirement from the feds, and they have requested that this be reconsidered because it costs more administratively than it will ever generate in monies. And furthermore, their question is, why would we charge our partners a fee for referrals, which is just ridiculous in my mind and the states as well. But it is what it is. It's a requirement.
Exactly.
But you understood that. Go ahead.
Title II won't be affected by this because we already co-share costs in some program locations. So as long as we have co-shared costs in some locations, it negates it for all locations.
Correct.
So, NRS or Octay, Jay Lemaster suggested, bring together a work group or some of your fiscally, numerically savvy formula folks and try to implement this with the least amount of burden on the local providers as possible. And so I'm not necessarily looking for answers today, but we can't wait until, April to implement this.
The year's half over. Sorry, pointing out, but
so even some sort of rudimentary formula. Some of you are keen on timing your LACIS data entry and then averaging that across programs and this and that. I don't know if it's going to take something like that at the local level or do you recognize that your intake, orientation, and pre-tests are 12 hours? that those first, that, yeah, well, I don't know.
Have you
But we're
talked,
going to have to,
have you talked to any
go
other
ahead.
states as to how they're doing it?
No.
So we can get some
No,
samples.
most other states really went, what? We were supposed to do this? No, I haven't heard of any state who
Okay.
has yet suggested, and that's not to say, you know, in these coming weeks and months, maybe we could learn from
Can we do a
some
sampling?
of our neighbors.
Would a sampling be an approved option maybe that we could try for? Like if we just randomly pick some sampling and track them through the year and say, okay, based on the sampling, X% is this and X% is that.
Yes. I mean, as long as we have some sort of methodology, they might make, you know, suggestions to improve it, but we need some sort of formula. So keep in mind, and we'll revisit this, but I wanted to plant these seeds.
John, this is Gloria, I like your idea of maybe a small committee creating a methodology for the others to consider in this regard.
You know, and even if we just put a skeleton of a formula together, having that by which we can, the next time we have a conference call, at least we have something we could analyze or tweak or disregard wholly or take it in part. So, okay. Thank you. I might reach out to a couple of you, or you can share your interest with me. NRS, leap again. I want to review the PowerPoint. We talked about that, career services, and then PD. All right. We have half an hour. How about your topics or discussions? Could we address those? I don't want to leave those till the end.
I would definitely like to talk about 16 and 17-year-olds and what other people are seeing. And then I would also like to talk about data entry date of the 7th, kind of just to get a gauge how it is for everybody else.
Anyone have some comments regarding 16 and 17-year-olds this year? Increased, decreased, plateaued?
John, this is Gloria and staff. We've not seen any significant increases. We still have agreements with the school districts in some of our locations for seats, slots, if you will, in return for no rent cost.
I'm having more and more problems with 16 and 17-year-olds, and it becomes more weird and more unusual with every single problem. And Becky, I think you agree with me. It's almost every week there's a new problem.
It seems like we've got a new inquiry from an underage student, yeah, but at least one a week at one of our program sites.
And it's never a traditional through the schools type of thing. It's always some weird issue. And they're coming through different avenues out of, moving into the state, homeschooling, like the school encouraged them to go homeschool, but now they don't know what to do with them. It's just, there's lots of barriers to the success. And unfortunately, I hate to say, well, come back when you're 18, because then they're going to have even more barriers.
But in many cases recently, they have not met any of the criteria to be included in our program. They're not an enrolled homeschooler. They are not sent to us through the court system. And then really, we feel like in many cases our hands are tied.
This is Gloria, so I'm a little bit confused. We get those inquiries as well, and we just say, this is state law. You have to go to your school district. We can't serve you.
Well, our school districts aren't serving them either. That's the problem.
And we are saying, We
I'm
are
having
seeing
the
that,
same
Gloria.
problem in Brookings. The schools, we have many parents coming in with their children that are under 18, and the schools have told them as long as the school signs off and says that they aren't going to graduate or whatever with their class, that they can not have to, you know, they can withdraw from school, and as long as they sign the paper, then they can come to me. I have many students this year that have come in.
What gave them that idea? Carla, do you know what gave them that idea?
The school, they say the schools are telling them that, and I talk to the schools every year. I talk to the counselors, I talk to the principals, the vice principals. I tell them the same thing. And again, every year we got these parents coming in saying, well, what are we supposed to do? We already signed the papers, and they told us that we could come to you as long as they signed the papers.
Do you think it's confusion between the difference between coming to an adult ed program and taking a GED test?
But the schools know that. I've told them that many times, that you know, they still can't come to me, you know, and but they're still telling the parents that they can. And I think this, I just get a lot of times that the schools are just, they just want them out, and this is a way to get them out. And then the parents are kind of like, now what are we supposed to do?
So essentially, you know, for context, I've spoken with Brookings superintendent or principal before, I think on 2 different occasions. But are they trying to treat the LATI adult education as a school contracted GED test prep program? Essentially.
No, I don't think so. I just think that they have it in their head that if they sign off that they don't have to stay in school till they're 18, that then they can send them to me. You know, and that's what they do. They give them my information and say, here, you know, that's where you want to go. And
but in doing so, that seems to me how they're treating you, because if they're not in school, they need to be homeschooled status. And if they're not homeschool status, it needs to be a school-based GED test prep program or a school-contracted GED test prep program. So if they're not homeschool and it's not school-based, the only real other option is a school-contracted, whereby they were, like, I don't know if it's akin to CLC of the Black Hills in school districts, but they have some sort of relationship or agreement with your program, and hopefully are compensating commensurately, so that
they know that we don't do that. They know that that's not the issue. And then one other instance that I had is they let the school send off, and they became homeschooling, but then the school told them to come to me to get the books to study for their GED. So the parent came in and said, I need to pick up these books. And I said, well, that's not what we do. I can't provide them. And she was just an assistant at the school in Brookings, told them that they could. And I was like, well, if that's, you know, go back to the school, because that's not really what my program does.
Well, I'd be happy. Go ahead.
Becky, you used the phrase that they didn't meet the criteria to be included in your program. Do you have certain criteria that they would sometimes meet?
Well, the guidelines tell us that we can serve students who are homeschooled and have official homeschool documentation, or who have been court ordered to pursue their GED. And then Cornerstones has a policy for serving students under 18 years of age that has other provisions as well. You know, we evaluate those on a case-by-case basis, and there are some times that, you know, there's no way that we're going to be able to serve a student because of the number of barriers that they have. But yeah, those are the two that are provided in the last guidance that I have found through the state.
This is Gloria, a question on that. When you say the guidance, is that, from my perspective, that's just not even legal, even if there's guidance out there, because that's not how the law is states. That's not what the law states.
I think she's referencing when Kendra was still youth program specialist, and they met for the umpteenth time with DOE. And because the youth program really wanted that consideration for their numbers and their programming, that the Department of Ed, the State Department of Ed, sort of equivocated and said, okay, well, if you really want to serve those homeschoolers, you can. And that's when we went from, for 2 years, we had Title I funds, adult and youth, and then just youth, and then it was a fee-for-service type of delivery system.
Right.
And for a while there, and so some of you are having Title I folks actually pay for some tutoring or something along those lines. Is that right? Do any of you this year have someone who's a youth and Title I youth is paying for tutoring or some other support service like that?
I don't know.
In the past, we had one student that they did that, but we were told now that they would not pay for tutoring fees.
I don't think we've had anybody this year. We have last year. We definitely did. We had a couple.
Yeah, and Carla, that was my understanding too. That, and then you fast forward a little bit, and then Secretary Holtman said, "Yeah, you know what? This is Department of Ed's. We will, as Title I youth, pay for all sorts of things: travel, per diem, gasoline, clothing, tool belts, childcare, but we're not going to pay for remedial education services." That was my latest understanding of that. Like they were for a couple years via a fee-for-service model. And I know the policies seem to contradict and change pretty frequently. And I think part of that's resultant of just local and state officials trying to serve these individuals who are falling through the cracks or who are in limbo and who might not have a really good school district. It varies greatly. I've had some superintendents call and they go to every length to make options available to students. And then there are other school districts which seem to go out of their way to push students out of the program and onto something else. So anyway, I don't know if we need to get, high level conference calls the next time something like this happens, that we need to organize a call with the superintendent and Secretary Holtman and Director Rinksmeyer and make it clear. Or if we use, I submitted a proposal to go speak at the South Dakota High School Guidance Counselors and Mental Health Professionals Conference in Pierre this spring in hopes to try to update a little bit of, the misunderstanding in terms of GED testing and transitional services. But other thoughts, ideas on how to, we got a new Secretary of Education coming. I don't know if it's ripe to, this spring, try to reinforce some clarity on these items.
Question, because I just want to make sure this is clear in my mind. Would there ever be a situation where it would be appropriate to use Title II funds to support services to 16, 17-year-olds?
An emancipated youth, legally an emancipated youth might be, because they are not required to be. Although, I once in a meeting had a State Department of Education lawyer tell me that even emancipated youth are still responsible to the Department of Ed. And in my mind, I'm calling, questionable, but I never passed the bar, so what do I know?
John, this is Gloria again. I guess I'm a little bit curious as to, our program does not want to push the envelope to try to serve 16 and 17-year-olds. We are not at all in favor of that. And the law, I think, is very clear in that regard. I think who needs a little bit of clarification, it sounds like to me, or superintendents across the state that, you know, by the way, this law was passed and you are responsible for serving 16 and 17-year-old students, and, you know, until they reach 18. And actually, they're responsible to serve them until they reach 21. By law, they are required to serve those students until they reach 21, unless there's a good reason that they have expelled them from school. So I don't know. Sometimes I hear in these conversations that we want to, and I just want to make it very clear that our program has no desire other than through the agreements that we have with the school districts, and those students are still required by that school district to meet seat time. So we are providing them with the time that we provide them for GED preparation, but they're still a school district student, and they still have to meet all of those requirements.
Yeah, Gloria, I agree with you. We don't want to either, and we do everything that we can to screen them back into a school district program. And the numbers that we have actually served have been very minimal, but there have been a couple of cases where, you know, the students have been willing to pay that fee for service and have met the criteria that Department of Ed had said they needed to meet in the past. But no, I agree with you. I certainly don't want to open the door to 16 and 17-year-olds across the board in any way, shape, or form. But we're seeing more and more of them inquire.
But there is a fair amount of latitude here. And here, right, school-based or school contracted, and this last legislative session, they updated the language. It used to read general educational development. And now it's high school equivalency test prep program. If that child will not graduate with the child's cohort class because of credit deficiency. And so that excuse or that rationale is used sometimes conservatively, but sometimes very liberally, where the student might be functionally almost a junior, but for whatever reason, the school district doesn't seem to want to serve them. And that notion of 21, I know, but that must be chuckled throughout. When's the last time that's happened? Very rare exception. But anyway, local control, I guess we need to, at the state level, take it case by case, but
do you think it's...
If we don't... Go ahead.
I still think it boils down to the confusion between us prepping them and us being a testing center.
I hope it would be that simple of a misunderstanding. Yeah. And that was one of my points for my presentation and I know that it's not going to make much, I don't expect much impact, but that was one of my first points of distinction. The difference between high school test preparation, adult education, and high school equivalency testing per se. So, if you're not getting anywhere and you're inclined to expand the discussion to make these points known, we can expand that, and I'd be happy. I would be glad to, and if we need more gravitas, I can ask my supervisor or even cabinet level if we need to have those discussions. And I would hope the local office managers too could maybe use this opportunity to reinforce these eligibility requirements and prerequisites. All right. What was your other topic? Not to curtail, but the time. Given the time, what was the other topic, Kim, you had mentioned?
Getting your data entry in by the 7th.
Oh,
is anybody else having problems, or is it just something we need to deal with? It's just a struggle for us.
Yeah, it's sometimes a struggle for us too. But I don't know that it really would be different. I mean, whatever date we have, I think is likely to create some kind of a struggle. So
Well, and I know that maybe one concern is that when I draw, or when we generate those reports with that timestamp and we're comparing against last year's Q2 data or whatever it might be, that, boy, if I haven't had my month's data entered, it could impact figures considerably. And so I'm sympathetic to that. Right now, the agreements read the 7th. I probably am not going to go through legal to modify, but if and I've always allowed more time, or just to let me know if you're going to need additional time. But it won't be long. We'll be drafting agreements for next year. If you think the 10th is more accommodating and more realistic, given how maybe some of you are trying to coordinate data across hundreds of miles or across a network system or whatever it might be, I have no issue with that. I recognize that the 5th was way too soon, just given the calendar and how a holiday weekend and.
Well, and we can continue
John,
to let you know, but.
Well, and I would say, I mean, generally, depending again how things fall and if there's a weekend in there and all of those considerations that everyone has, generally I can have my raw data in, but it's not final and complete by the 7th. I'm just going to say that, because whenever I'm entering, there are always questions, and because we do have to bounce things back and forth between programs, by the time I get clarification and answers and make adjustments then on some of the data, it's easily the 10th by the time I'm done with all of that and running my own reports, certainly. So. But if that's just me, then I'll just work faster. Tell my boss I need overtime.
There you go. I'm very accommodating. I hope you don't think me too slavish or too much of a taskmaster as it relates to those sorts of things. Next year, we can certainly change the date to the 10th for consistency's sake, or change it now since it's the first year of WHEEL implementation. I'm really indifferent, whatever consensus or necessity demand. No? Okay. 10 minutes. We don't have enough time to go through both of these remaining items. How are you, just raise of hands, just verbally, are you getting more comfortable with the periods of participation? Do you have outstanding questions? Is it still very abstract to you? Or now that we have that first year of POPs under our belt, it's starting to make a little more contextual sense?
John, I just think it's making better sense now that we've gotten into it, and it doesn't scare you so much because now you can see kind of what you've got going on.
Yeah, and this NRS, I don't know that I have it open, but this PowerPoint, I think it's one that there's no sense in recreating the wheel. This is one that we just need to continually revisit, and I think it makes more and more sense the more you read it and the more familiar one gets with POPs, and especially as it relates to crossing program years. Some of this is, infrequent, but where we have a stop and then a return, and that we're using a new pretest as a post-test on that last POP. And I think just don't hesitate to call me just for my own information and validation as I learn it too, and for confirmation's sake. And again, in the interest of time, I would like to just to touch on PD. I sent that data diagnostic model reference, and I don't know if any of you had a chance to even open it. But this is the model that we used when we went to our NRS regional training in Texas last month, and I found it quite helpful. And so I want to give you a little bit of a task or two as we scale this to the local level. And we don't need to be incredibly detailed, but to have an understanding of determining, are these issues related to understanding the nuances of program reporting, collection requirements, or challenges to the implementation? And of course, monitoring both back and forth, leading to program improvement ultimately. And you saw those definitions there. And so I want to take this a step further from theory to action. And what I'd like you to do, I was thinking December 22nd. I know everyone's pretty busy, and I don't think I'm going to be able to do anything with your homework, your activity, your process before the new year anyway. So that gives you 6 weeks to perform this planning activity. And I have the directions here. I just adjusted a few words to make it local. But my preference is that there are at least 2 of you, a director and a coordinator and a lead teacher. Maybe you and all your key staff wanted that. That's really your determination. But the first step is what I'd like you, hopefully on a sheet of paper that you can scan. Maybe you want to do it, conduct it using an outline or a flow chart. When we conducted this activity with the feds, it was simply drawing on a sheet of paper, sort of an infographic of trying to illustrate your data flow in your state. As simple as that. And then creativity stemmed from there. But I would like you to conduct that exercise as well, that data flow representation or graphic with at least one other, preferably more. And I want you to consider, can you see that? Here's another, it's like a data flow notes to get you thinking, but you've got intake, teachers, data entry, reporting, program admin, review. But really I'm going to switch back to this tool, looking at these 4 columns. So after you illustrate your data flow from beginning, from whence that student walks into your door or into your facility, through the program year and beyond, right? So after exit and into follow-up, look at that chart or that graph or that illustration you created and try to identify areas of strength, and then go into the activity where you need to maybe make some modifications or improvements. And a little bit of narrative on those problems, potentially how they might be corrected. Maybe some of it's just capacity and fiscally related, or perhaps not. And then whether referencing that data diagnostic model, is it an issue of understanding, implementation, or monitoring? And my hopes is that you could have this completed by December 22nd-ish, share it with me, and then in January we could convene again and discuss these together. Maybe what I was thinking is a 5-minute, so you have a 1-page paper that you could scan and then share with the entire group. 7 of us, 5 minutes apiece, right? We could have it we could probably do it in 45 minutes or so, even with a few questions, just to articulate how it is that data flow operate. I think it'd be useful not only for your own agency, but for the rest of the statewide programming to hear how you collect and enter certain pieces, and I think that might be a good springboard for other discussions regarding data collection, data quality, data entry, and efficiency. And then after we get here, there are other steps too as we get more granular. Thoughts, questions, concerns about the timeline?
John, this you'll be setting out the rest of this document?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
And instructions and detailed instructions or expectations. That illustration, I conscious of my own penmanship and illustration capabilities, I'm a little self-conscious about rendering a data flow free-handed, but I really want this to be more about the process rather than the product, right? The process of you engaging with your coordinator and your lead teachers to talk about these issues. And when we conducted this, it quickly became clear where we perceived or identified some issues where there was likely bottlenecking or areas that were potentially rife with the opportunity for data inaccuracies or that type of thing. So I shall send out these references, this tool, and brief instructions. But I want this to be part of our data quality recalibration, really have us immersed in WIOA reporting. And I think the more time we spend with it, the less theoretical and vague some of these POPs and other data collection elements become. So it's 12 o'clock. Comments, thoughts for the good of the order? If you have one more minute, Kim, do you want to comment at all on next week? We have an English language instructor development program here in Sioux Falls on the 20th and 21st.
Yep.
Do you want to update on GED topical trainings, regional?
I think most of them are coming out to people that I've talked to, so okay. I'll just leave it at that for right now. In time, I will comment. The TESOL conference was excellent.
All right, good.
And that I will need some input from the people who completed the survey on the ANI, because we are planning on moving forward with that. And then I would like some input, and I'll send out something on Summer Summit and what kind of trainings we might want to offer there, because I think we're probably going to have to split it a little more in the GED track, because we have such a difference between staff longevity. We have a lot of very new teachers, and we have a lot of experienced teachers, and very little in between.
So you're suggesting that almost two tracks for adult basic, adult secondary, those for more experienced senior staff, and those for newer, probably, or more recent staff?
I'm cringing at that, but probably.
And spring conference, do you think that's something that we're tentatively still considering, or do you think with the regional GED TS trainings?
Well, yeah.
Or is that still unknown?
We have the regional GED TS trainings. We just scheduled our first one today. Becky has a couple dates, I think, set for things too that are coming out. We should announce the December one, Becky.
December 14th at 4 p.m. Central, 3 p.m. Mountain. We're going to hold the first GED. It's just kind of a general webinar. It's on performance level descriptors and high impact indicators. So it would be beneficial, I think, to anyone who's working in the GED field.
This is the 14th?
The 14th, yes.
But this is a webinar. This isn't related to our regional trainings.
We wanted
Correct.
we wanted to
It's kind of
preference as a precursor to those, so that we weren't having to address those at the regionals.
much of the content of the regional trainings. Yeah, much of the content of the regional trainings will refer back to those performance level descriptors and high impact indicators. So this is kind of I wouldn't call it a prerequisite, but it would be very beneficial to anyone who's going to attend those trainings to be very familiar with those two items.
All right, so to sort of re-solidify some of the foundations related to performance level descriptors, high impact indicators, and the regional trainings will be after the first of the year then, most likely?
Yes. And
then those will be in Sioux Falls,
we have
Huron.
Yep, we have the one scheduled. We're going to do social studies in Huron the week of January 8th, and I don't have the exact day yet. I'm trying to finalize the schedule. And then we will have one in Sioux Falls, and then because we're looking at an AEL IDP in Rapid, maybe something later in the year.
Okay, but that's the notion. Sioux Falls, Huron, and Rapid City to.
Yeah, and Sioux Falls may or may not coincide with a. They were talking about having a spring conference. Laura was kind of excited about this, but now that we're doing the regionals and we just had TESOL, I'm not sure where we all stand with that. We haven't had time to talk till the end of the month.
Right.
Becky, this is Jennifer with DOC. Are those webinars going to be recorded? Because the issue I have in DOC is we can't have access to our institutions usually after 3:30 or 4 o'clock. So none of my teachers can have access to their offices after then. So none of my staff would be able to participate at that late in the afternoon.
Yes, they are going to be recorded, and that's good to know. We'll think about that for scheduling future webinars.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you, everyone. I know that was rushed, but I appreciate the time to discuss TABE and participation and performance and upcoming PD and some of these other perennial issues in terms of meeting our learners' needs. I hope you have a strong autumn, and yeah, and don't hesitate to contact me with any questions or suggestions. Kendra apologized for not attending today. She had every intention, however, she had meetings with Cabinet Secretary Holtman, so on her behalf, we wish you well. Thank you, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you, John.
Bye.